In this video, I want to share with you the most important thing when it comes to parenting. And if you employ and use this, it's not a strategy. If you employ this principle, you will become so much more effective as a parent, especially if your young person is struggling. So let me start with a story. I've been coaching this family for quite a while, and I know them very well for a couple of years, I think. And in the early stages of us working together, they were having a lot of problems connecting with their kids. And their kids didn't really listen to them. It might be a stretch to say they didn't really like their parents that much. It's probably true. And they had a couple of young teenager and a kind of an older teenager. And they just were struggling with parenting. The kids didn't listen to them. They're starting to misbehave. They're starting to act out a little bit. In fact, they were acting out more than they actually wanted to act out because they wanted to get back at the parents because they felt like the parents were trying to control them. Does that sound familiar? It's pretty common. And these kids they're great kids, but they were kind of like, they were acting out more than they would have just to spite the parents, because the way that the parents were relating to them was in this kind of control-oriented way of power over, not empowering the kids while still holding structure. So I'm coaching them, and I give them some examples of things that they could say, right? Which is something that I used to do early on in my career as a therapist and as a coach, working with young people and families. I've been doing it for 23 years. So maybe 20 years ago, I learned this as like strategy is like, this is what you should teach parents to say to kids. And as a neophyte therapist, I was kind of like, okay, I'll do that. And that doesn't work, but I'm going to explain why. So I gave the parents some things to say to their kids that could be helpful, right? And those things include asking them how they feel, asking them to tell them how they feel. So making a statement instead of a question. Questions put people into their brain, has them kind of think about it, doesn't necessarily tell them how their emotions are, right? And questions get into this world of like yes, no, and it becomes a whole question, answer, which is kind of unhelpful. So it's helpful to have people share statements when you're making requests as opposed to questions, generally speaking. I also taught them to make statements about how they feel, right? And to open up and to share a little bit in vulnerable ways, to dismantle the power structure that was happening in a helpful way, and many other things, right? So we're doing this session, and I'm facilitating this family session. And I said, okay, well, why don't you tell Dad, why don't you tell her how you feel? And he said, well, I feel peaceful. I feel peaceful and I feel curious. I feel curious about what she's going to say to me because things have not been going well. She has not been, following rules, and I feel just curious. That's how I feel. I feel curious. And I thought to myself, okay, this gentleman is not curious. He seems very frustrated and angry, understandably, but he's not curious, right? So I said, okay, that's fine. And the kids are just squirming, and you can feel them just boiling inside, just ready to kind of shoot back, emotionally, with their dad. And I said, okay, Mom, why don't you share a little bit around how you're feeling and what you'd like to say and how you'd like to start this session. A little bit more context than that. And she said, similarly, well, I'm just, I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious, and I just want to know. And, I really like to know how she feels and how he feels, and yeah, and I'm just curious. Things have not been going well, and I really just want to know how they feel and what I can do to change. I really want to know, and that's what I want, And I'm exaggerating a little bit. I'm dramatizing a little bit just to make a point. She wasn't curious either. There's a bit of curiosity there, but what was really driving her statement about being curious was that she was anxious and fearful and worried. Again, understandably so. Right? Now, needless to say, it all worked out great, right? Because I gave this teaching to them and said, listen, it's okay to feel however you're feeling. If you're angry, you're frustrated, if you're worried and anxious, that's fine. Just say so, right? And we kind of dismantled it and gave this teaching around it's important to be aligned with our feelings and our words. Otherwise, it's essentially like lying. If I say I'm curious and I'm a little bit curious, but mostly angry, it's not going to be received well. And that was a part of the anatomy of the power struggle that we went into. And it worked out great. And these are wonderful parents, right? And they just didn't know it. Like I didn't know, right? I didn't know about this stuff. I wasn't raised to know about this stuff, about emotions. I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin in the 90s. The therapy wasn't something that you did if you were interested in self-growth. You just stuffed it down. And for me, you smoked some weed and you drank a bunch of beer and you partied at night. So anyway, all that to say, they're wonderful people. The family's in a great situation now. Their kids are grown up, and it was a wonderful situation. We all learned a lot, right? So all this to say, here's the important strategy. Being is greater than doing. Meaning, 80 of the 100% of what you do, 80% of it is driven by your psychology, and 28% of it is driven by strategy. Right? For example, how you are is more important than what you say or what you do. So if you want to be effective in communicating something to your kids and you want to be closer to your kids, look at how you are, the person that you are, how you feel, what's going on in your life. It's not necessarily to share that all with them, but to know for yourself, so that when you know that it's best to be curious with kids, if they're acting out, which it is, best to be curious with kids, make sure that you can be like 90% curious. It's okay if you're worried or you're frustrated or angry, but if you lead with that in the conversation with your kids, they're not going to talk to you. They're not going to open up. Because who wants to, you're in charge of them in their mind, right? You may not actually be, but you hold some responsibility around educating them to become the people that they are, right? Some percent above 0%. You have some responsibility in that. The kids can feel that, so they feel like you have some power over them. Any teenager will feel that way. It's actually healthy in some ways for them to feel a little like upset about that, because that actually fosters their desire to have independence. Like they don't like being kind of shackled in a way. They want to break free and be independent, and you can kind of teach them around what it means to be independent in healthy ways, right? So all this to say, how you are will open the gateway of the relationship with your kids if you are attuned to their experience and you're attuned to yourself. Right? So if your kids are feeling frustrated and you can feel like there's a power struggle and they just won't do what you say and they're not following rules, they're not opening up, whatever it is, look at how you are first. Look at how you're feeling. Look at what's going on in your life. And then get to the point where you can be curious about how they're doing and what's happening in their life and what's happening in their relationship with you, such that they are showing up the way that they are, right? And it's okay. I would say it's healthy even to be frustrated or sad or whatever it is, worried or devastated even. It's important for us to acknowledge how we're feeling. But again, if we lead with that and not actual curiosity, our kids they're not going to follow your rules. They're not going to have influence with them, which is arguably the most important thing you have as a parent with your children is influence. There's a lot that won't happen if you don't lead with curiosity, and real curiosity based on a care and a real desire to know, where you tuck your own fears and concerns and issues that you need to sort out with your children aside, right? So if you employ this one thing, being is greater than doing, right? 80% psychology, 20% strategy. Yeah? How you are is more important than what you say or what you do. If you start to utilize this with yourself and in your relationship with your kids, you will absolutely start to see some significant change and improvement in your relationship with your kids. And you've got this, and all my best.